And now we are changing the scene completely to procurement. Less of a, what do you call it, human or kind of humanistic part of this, more technical maybe, but just as important, of course, for accessibility. So we are going to look at procurement from 3 different angles, so to speak. We are having Peter Kemeny here, who is the team lead of the ACCICT, that's really hard to say, creating a resource for on behalf of the standardization organizations to support the procurers. So I asked Peter to start giving a little bit of an overview of how the current situation is with procurement directives and so on, and how the EAA affects all of this. Then we will hear from, and Peter is originally from Hungary, but now in Luxembourg. So we're ticking off 2 countries with him as a speaker. That's very good. And then we will hear from Norway. So because the IAAP EU is always EU plus family and friends, so Norwegians and Swiss and UK people are always welcome. So Kristian Munter Simonsen from Inklud will talk about a research report investigation that he and his team has done on public procurement in Norway. And he has not only the perspective of the procurers, but mainly on the kind of demand side and what can be improved. And then, last but not least, we will hear from Jessica Söderbäck, who will talk from the supplier side on what happens when you, from the IT industry, would like to reply to a procurement and make sure that accessibility is achieved, but maybe a little bit sometimes difficult to kind of meet on the same area here. So I think with this, we will have a very good kind of common perspective of at least 3.3 perspectives of procurement. And I will ask Peter to start with addressing the current situation and what the ACCICT program has been working on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, Susanna, and giving this opportunity to present this guidance that will be published hopefully, well, but hopefully next year. And so, as you mentioned, I was the project team lead in the ACCICT project, but I need to mention also my colleagues, expert colleagues who worked on it with me, Agata Savicka and Detlef Fischer, and I thank them for their great work. And also, as it is a project by the European standardization organizations, I would also like to thank their help and really helpful and accommodating approach, and the public procurement experts who helped us during a workshop when doing this revision. So what it is about adjusting the 2 existing guidelines or guidances for the recent situation, the current situation. The previous guidelines were published in 2014. Next slide, please. Back, yes, thank you. And then the situation was that in the public procurement legislation, accessibility was promoted, but definitely not mandatory. There was not a lot of accessibility legislation, if any, and so the 2 guidances were back then focusing on award criteria and conformity assessment. Fast forward today, since 2016, in the public procurement, accessibility is mandatory. It has to be considered obligatorily, and since 2014 there has been a lot of accessibility legislation that passed in Europe, and the requirements are more and more specific. Meanwhile, in the Web Accessibility Directive, it was the 4 principles. In the European Accessibility Act, it's already detailed requirements, and or revised guidance tries to cover all the public procurement life cycle from the pre-award phase, setting the technical specification, selection and exclusion criteria, award criteria, conformity assessment, and including the contractual obligations. Next slide, please. So the features or the approaches for this revision were to create a new guidance. It's a complete overhaul. and this is the number of it, Senelec ACCICT Technical Report 101551 revised. Probably that will be the name. And the revision aims to align the guidance with legislation, both the current public procurement legislation and the European accessibility legislation, like the EAA and the Web Accessibility Directive. It also aligns the guidance with the standard, mainly the EN 301549 standard, as that is the most mature, and that's already in use as a harmonized standard for the Web Accessibility Directive, but also to consider other standards. The European Accessibility Act will have 6 harmonized standards. So the guidance tries to, well, cover them or at least relate to them as much as possible, although they are not in a mature state. Also, so the main aim is to facilitate the use of the accessibility requirements in the public procurement, both the standards and the legislation directly, and we try to add some practical examples to make it easier to understand. So what are the main features of this new guidance? And I will put the name in the chat so you know what to look for in 2026. First of all, it helps understanding the framework, how the accessibility legislation and the public procurement legislation works together. It helps how to identify accessibility requirements for the technical specifications, how to assess the technical and professional abilities for setting up selection criteria. Then how to make the bidders compete on accessibility, how to create award criteria that can earn extra points for the bidders and can then make it possible to have a higher accessibility than the minimum required in the law. Then the other interesting part is it helps understanding conformity assessments. We know that contracting authorities might not have the knowledge or the capacities to do conformity assessments, so the main focus is how to assess these assessments, how to understand if they show a good enough level and if they are reliable. And apart from that, there is also a part that addresses the market gap where the suppliers might not be able to provide accessibility, or not many suppliers, and then this limits the competition. And it also promotes end user involvement, because without that, it would be all about just conforming with the laws, which is important, but with including end users, it is for making sure that the products and services procured are really accessible. That's in a nutshell. Thank you.
That ended faster than I realized. Thank you very much, Peter. That was a good overview of an important document that will be published next year. It's more or less finalized now and is kind of under voting process in the standards, but will be an informative document released kind of in the same package as all the other standards supporting EAA. So then we move on to Kristian, who will talk about how to avoid the top accessibility pitfalls in public procurement, insights for buyers and suppliers. This sounds like you are addressing everything. So.
Yes, in 5 minutes, nonetheless. Hello, everyone. My name is Kristian. I work at Inklud, and I am from Norway. I have a couple of slides that I just want to kind of emphasize some typical pitfalls that you might encounter and how to avoid them. And my first recommendation would be to define the scope and legal confines. Especially in Norway and in other non-EU countries, we are balancing requirements, and when are we following the EU and when are we not? There might be national requirements and international requirements. So that is something where you can start by properly understanding which confines you are working with it. The next thing I would recommend is to define a bit better which type of solution are we talking about. Is it an internal system? Is it public facing? Is it a so-called intranet or extranet solution? All of these things might affect which requirements you should test or require. And that goes as well for apps, web pages, and documents. Most of you here might know that not all of the requirements in WCAG and the EN is applicable to, or every single requirement isn't applicable to every single type of ICT solution. So that might help you to either broaden or narrowing the scope of the requirements. There's also some context that might be nice to already keep in mind when you are writing your requirements, such as content like maps or CMS systems. There might be some really nice requirements to set for a procurement of a CMS system that might help you prevent future issues from content producers. And not at least keep in mind what are the most important user journeys. You should probably try to define some journeys that are essential and that should contain less or no errors, such as login or alike. And if you're a public sector company, you also need to think about the accessibility statement. And that also comes into the context of which type of solution you are acquiring. It might be a type of solution where you are editing a lot of the content of what you have procured, and you might be responsible, or it might be most practical for you to be responsible for the accessibility statement. In other cases, when you buy a more out-of-the-box or off-the-shelf product, it might be better to require your supplier to give you a basis, some tests, to base your accessibility statement on. And I'm going to quickly show you two examples that I have experienced myself. The first example is not defining formal requirements. In one project that I was on, they were changing the whole purchasing system for a third-party supplier. And after doing some testing and giving some feedback to the supplier, they found out there was not really specified any WCAG compliance. That made it very expensive and cumbersome to address afterwards. The second one is a bit more poignant, and I think something that might even be more applicable to most of you here today, and that is to make sure that both parties actually understand what you are requiring. A lot of the times, suppliers will check a box or say, yes, we can deliver on this, we promise, here is a report, blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to the fact, and you actually do some testing yourself even, you might figure out that there is quite a lot of issues. And you might not, either party might not have understand the full scope of what we were talking about. So in that example, the whole project was stopped because the supplier suddenly figured out, oh, this is actually a lot of work. We didn't expect this. We cannot do this within this budget. Quite unfortunate. The next slide is mainly just to give you an illustration. This is written all in Norwegian, so the content here is not what's in focus. I just want to show you one way that we helped public companies in Norway to map out which type of system and in which scenario should I define which criteria. That will be very helpful when you're a procurer. Next slide, please. The second point is to actually define measurable requirements. In a lot of years here in Norway, I have seen procurements that simply ask yes or no question regarding compliance. This is quite unfortunate because the people who actually do testing and know of issues will not check that box, and that will automatically exclude them from the procurement. So please do not ask for Boolean requirements. Combine quantitative and qualitative assessments. You might want to expect above 60% compliance, and you might want not to accept less than 50% compliance. These numbers are a bit arbitrary. They might be more or less in your situation, but at least in the broad scope, that's kind of a recommendation. You might also have some true absolute showstoppers like seizures 231, where you cannot accept any issues on this requirement. You might also want to include some acceptance testing. Do you completely 100% trust the testing that the supplier has done themselves, or do you want to do some testing yourself? And also define some fixing timelines for non-conformities. Who is responsible for fixing any issues that are found later on? And next slide, I just want to give you some things to keep in mind. Procurers are often degrees separated from the need. So the procurer does most often not actually know what is being acquired. They might not be a user of the system, and as such, you need to be very specific with what you actually need when you lift such a procurement. Another good tips is the RACI, which is a simple tool that you can use to map out different activities and assign different responsibilities. So the abbreviation RACI is for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And that might help you map out, even if it's in the maintenance of a system, in the procurement of a system, or whatever. You can map out activities and set who is responsible, who is accountable, who should be consulted, and who is informed. In Norway, we also have a supplier portal where it's voluntary for suppliers to go onto this portal and make a self-evaluation of their product. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristian, for this overview. And I don't know if your report is public or not. Is it possible?
Yes, it is. I'm going to send it. Unfortunately, it is in Norwegian only.
Well, everyone should know Norwegian by now, so that's not a...
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so now we move to the supplier side. So Jessica, please, you have promised us to give us a presentation on kind of the supply side, so how the ICT, the salespeople and the people who are actually wanting to do the right thing, how they perceive the procurement situation here. So accessibility is not a checkbox, it's competence and continuity. Please.
Thank you very much, Susanna. So my name is Jessica Söderbäck, and I've been working with sales and delivery of digital services for the public sector for many years. I've been working with both the expertise consultancy offerings, but also, which has been very close to my heart, the projects where accessibility has been an important factor. So I've lost and I won many public tenders. I've seen very good examples and I've seen very bad. I've seen where accessibility is a success, and I've also seen a lot of struggles. And quite often, it all starts with the way it's bought and how it's contracted. And when I boil down the 3 key factors that can make or break a great collaboration and a good result, it comes down to this. And it will be pretty similar to what Kristian said, but maybe from another perspective. So please, next slide. So first, and maybe most important, is the big competence and leadership gap that we see across buying organizations. So it's not just a design skill. Still, a lot of people think it's a design skill. And I think the inexperience and lack of competence are very common and not that strange. For many people on this side, it's maybe a once in a career buy or purchase. It's not their core expertise. And also accessibility is just one part of a big digital framework or project. So it's difficult if you only do this once in your career to have all these details in place. Therefore, a lot of customers, they rely too heavily on getting the competence from expert at the supplier side. But it's actually not enough to rely solely on the suppliers, and it's also often too late. The risk is also to choose a supplier that is not what you need. I think you need the internal knowledge and skills in many different roles. Maybe you don't need the expertise or the in-depth competence, but you need to plan the project and set the requirements and the realistic expectations and a real budget long before you take on suppliers and have them contracted and onboarded. You also need to have this competence when the suppliers are gone, when you change. So competence and leadership. And also that's where the struggle with requirements and expectations are set. Because if you don't have competence when you define the public tenders, the requirements and the expectation can be too lightly defined or not realistic at all. I've seen many tenders where the only definition of accessibility is meet VCAG AAA, period. But they don't know what that means for themselves internally. They absolutely don't know how to verify it, and they quite often don't have the budget and the funds to reach for the highest level. They also don't have the internal organization and the team to keep it on that level. So it's, and also a lot of organization doesn't have to have the highest level. So to have competence early on to set the right level for you and also set the right budget, I'd say. And one thing that is always, I'd say, maybe not always, but almost always forgotten is the long-term perspective when it comes to continuity, and also use this as a hygiene factor. Quite often, especially in the beginning of working with this, accessibility was like a checkbox. Did we get an accessible design? Then we're home, then we're safe. But it's not. That's just the start. Then you need to have, the big challenge is to keep it accessible over time. Because we know that we get new functionality, we get new content, we get new regulations, we get new tools, and we also change teammates and we change suppliers. So to keep it at a certain level requires internal dedication and also knowledge. Even if you have a really good supplier and you have a content team, someone has to own their responsibility. And I've seen the responsibility for accessibility is very often not defined. Who is it? Also, quite many big projects, they are purchased everything at once. So you have one project, and then you also have a part where you go into support and application management. And there are rarely defined, accessibility is rarely defined when it comes to application management. You only define who do I call when I have a technical bug or an issue. Then also quite often you have content responsibility in your own organization, but who owns the accessibility on that side? So we need to see it as a forever project, I'd say. So if you go to the next slide, I've just like when it all comes down, it's all about competence. And you really need to make sure that you have the competence like before, during, and after a project. And my highest recommendation when I see that it actually has been a good project is when you early evaluate your own internal competence. What do we really know internally and what do we need help with? And not just during the project with development and design. You will save money, you will get a better project and a better outcome if you bring in an expert early to the project. Someone that has done this before, and it's not just about accessibility, someone that knows how to in the first run, make sure that the organization defines what are our expectations, what are our budget, what are our requirements, what do we really want to do with this? And then also supports the procurement. How do we evaluate different suppliers? Because everybody, just as Kristian said, everybody will tick all the boxes that you can tick. But how do we really choose what's good and not? Do we really just ask about, tell me all the websites you developed? That's not enough. And also, will you make this VCAG compliant? So you need someone externally maybe to help the procurement, to help the buyer, but also looking into your own organization and plan. Did we plan for making all the content we have today accessible? Probably not. Have we reasonable time in our calendar to do all this job? Do we have the budget? If you have the possibility, keep that person throughout the project as well. Make sure that you, in parallel, set up an organization that suits you and your needs. It could be partly internal and partly from a supplier. And then next time, maybe you can do it yourself. But I say that's my biggest advice is, because I'm normally coming in later on, but for me to do a good job with my team, I'm completely reliant that they have had a good knowledge on their side when they buy this. So, and then, of course, make sure that you educate your people continuously, and also make sure that your suppliers are educating team continuously. So when they change people, they should still keep the competence within the team. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for this, and thank you for sharing all your knowledge. So now I think we've heard three kind of different perspectives on this, and I will stop sharing so we can see you better. I think we all agree, from coming from different perspectives, but still, and at least many in the accessibility community agree that procurement that is carried out in a good way is really kind of essential to achieve a high level of accessibility. It makes it easier and faster and better often so. But still, this is not really happening very often. So do you have any idea why that is still the case? You touched upon some of the things, that the procurers are not the same people who are actually knowledgeable. But why are we still talking about this after so many years? Does anyone have a clue? Kristian?
Yeah, I would like to start. I would argue that the procurers often don't see the long-term consequences. Once you have completed a tender or a procurement, it's kind of off your hands. So the responsibility or the long-term consequences never is felt by the procurer. Another thing I would say is that it's often that one perceives it as costly to do right. As Jessica said, there is a lot of parties involved. There is a lot of planning you need to do and scoping it out. But what most people miss is that it's even more costly to do wrong. Like what I say when I enter a customer, the cheapest thing you can do when it comes to accessibility is holding your suppliers by the ear and telling them we expect better. You should have it in your contract and keep them responsible. I think it's also a lot to do about maturity in organizations. In Norway, the smallest municipality has 200 persons they are responsible for, and they are just as responsible for acquiring accessible solutions as Oslo, like the biggest municipality. So there is also a thing with resources here, which is interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Jessica, do you have any additional?
Yeah, maybe I'm repeating myself, but I think it's because you very rarely you just buy accessibility. It's quite often a part of something bigger, or a part of someone's skills or the portfolio. And also it's a rare buy. So many of the organizations that I've been working with, they buy a lot and they buy like repeat business. When we come in buying this, it's more like something new. And last time they bought a new web, everything has happened since. So it's difficult to keep templates and reference material relevant, I'd say. And also, how do you mix this into the big picture? So I'd say the difficult part is that once you find the good template, Next time you do it, it's already old. And also, as Kristian said, they never get the feedback. We could have done this better. We should have done it this way. What succeeded last time? Maybe on frame agreements, they have like big project teams. They go through. What did we end up last time? But when you do these smaller projects, they don't never have any lesson learned, I'd say.
Which is terrible from a taxpayer's point of view, because you would really hope that they learn and do better next time. Peter, you have interviewed procurers and many other stakeholders during this report writing process. So what do you think have you discovered something?
Yeah, well, nothing new, but I think the two things are main things apart from knowledge and capacity and budget. It's awareness and the fears. So it's one, as Jessica said, also, it's one of the requirements in public procurement, fairly recent one. It might not be enforced that much, so people, contracting authorities can get away with the checkbox solution, and they might not even be aware, not only the consequences, but the importance of it. So that's one thing. And the other is the fears, even if they are aware, and that came back a lot of times, that the market is not mature. If we require accessibility, then we might not have enough suppliers bidding, so we limit the competition, and that might drive up the price, or even worse, end up with not being able to procure what we need. So the priority is to get it. Well, it doesn't matter what sometimes. So that's I think that's a very important. That's a very important aspect of it. So that the solution to that is to prepare also the market and warn them in advance. For example, that either accessibility will be happening from now on, or that in this procurement you have to change your products to be able to bid.
It's interesting that you call it warn them. RFIs are usually kind of a positive things, but yeah, I kind of agree with that. But I also think kind of in the last round when we did the similar job in the standardization process, we did talk to very few, admittedly, procurers, but I also have the feeling that saying that if we post the requirements so high, nobody will respond, it's a little bit, it may be an easy way out. I think it doesn't, I mean, it could happen, and in that case, it would be a problem, but I think it's also kind of a way to dodge. But now we have all this good information, but how can we reach the procurers or even the whole organization so that it because I think we all agree also that it has to do with kind of collaboration within the organization. So how do we reach them? I mean, it's almost like a joke in standardization that we have problems reaching the procurers, that we just don't need. We try to provide them with things they need or what we think they need, but very few of them work together with us. So does anyone have an idea, Jessica? Do you know how anyone could reach the procurers to kind of train them in this or make them more aware of the issues?
No, and actually I think maybe we shouldn't focus on them. Maybe the responsibility has to come from the business side or the organization side, the ones that actually have in their contract, you are responsible for this service or information or app or whatever it can be. Maybe they are the ones that have to have the domain expertise. They also have the interest. So of course we could support procurement with inspirational templates and how to do it. But I think the real responsibility is still within the domain in the company or organization.
That's interesting. I would pose it on both sides, but
yes, of course. But it's difficult for them to become the experts of everything. I say they can't be technical solution architects, designers, and accessibility. They will never have that. So it's not a reasonable ask, but we could help them, of course. They should have, in bigger organizations, they should have someone that is interested in these parts and communication. But in smaller public companies, or they are only one or two. So they are struggling as well, I'd say.
Yeah, I think in many layers they are maybe struggling. But also, like you said, that it's also possible to kind of buy your way out of that. If you don't know what you don't know, then at least you can kind of get a friend and pay a little bit to have somebody supporting you. I think that could be really, really useful and a good investment for many organizations, big or small. So, Kristian, do you have an idea of how to reach the procurers with? I mean, you have tried with your report, I'm sure, but is there another way?
And even with the report, it's difficult. Like, it's a good report, and we've mapped out 3 different scenarios where you want the supplier to do all of the testing, where you want to do both type of testing, like yourself and the supplier, and where you do all of the testing. And that is kind of the scenarios there is also broken down into testing steps for somebody without technical knowledge. So, for example, if you are in the super tiny municipality with 200 citizens, you actually have some basis to do some of the testing yourself. But I completely agree with Jessica. It's not achievable to have every procurer be testing the solutions. But I think one good example, at least for reaching out to the suppliers, is from Bergen Kommune or Bergen Municipality, where they have a whole separated webpage where they give information towards the suppliers. We expect this. Here is the template you need to fill out for all of our public procurements. It makes it really easy to standardize and kind of have everybody on the same page. But I think at the end, it's probably about maturity, as again, Jessica pointed out, knowing what resources you have available, which competencies you have access to, where do you need to include somebody from externally. It is quite complex. So I feel for every procurer that is responsible for this.
That's very nice of you.
Yeah.
Peter, do you have any ideas? How are you going to sell the technical report to the...
Well, yeah, that's a nice take on the question. I think so. One thing is that because it's a complex issue, and then there is a budget missing for smaller municipalities or competencies. One idea that's in the report, and maybe this is already selling it, is to raise it to a policy level and have like an advisory group at the national or regional level that can help. So that's on the one hand provides for user involvement, and on the other hand provides help for the public procurers, for the contracting authorities. I found Jessica's comment interesting, and hopefully with the EAA, with the suppliers having to actually offer more and more accessible products and services, it might not be a problem because that's all what they will offer, and then the contracting authorities won't need to do anything. But on the other hand, I think if they are not requiring it consciously, if they don't know how to do it, then up to a certain point, corporate greed will work in a different direction. So how to spread this guidance? I think we have a very good example with the WAD that monitoring and enforcement agencies are not policing but helping and guiding public sector bodies. So there it could be added to that guidance to make them realize that it's easier to procure it already accessible than suffering afterwards. And I think an interesting thing would be including it in training of public procurement professionals. Maybe the guidance or maybe something more detailed.
Yeah, very good. So we got a comment in the chat. I guess it's kind of a joke, but maybe suppliers also need to be CPACC certified. So that's a nice comment. But you do say something about that in the report about how to kind of measure the competence, don't you, Peter?
Yes. So the technical report has as its principle the recognition that public procurers, contracting authorities might not have the capacity, might not have the money, might not have the knowledge. So there's a lot of shifting towards external certifications. For example, that certification of of the bidders can be a requirement, can be a selection criteria, or can be an award criteria. So that way it can be built in. Also, a similar approach for what Kristian mentioned for the conformity assessment. The idea in this guidance is that, yeah, you might not be able to do this, but you have to understand if a conformity assessment is given with the bid, if it's good, you have to understand if it's reliable, if it really proves that the product or service is accessible. So that's not certification, but but the two things together, I think, will help ease the pain for the contracting authorities.
So we have another question here. What if you do not have the competence and have nevertheless commissioned the company? Then you are kind of in a bad situation. And how should you proceed when that has already happened? So if somebody didn't meet or do what we required here or recommended. So what then? What do you do when you are in that situation? Jessica, somebody is not doing what I tell them to do, so the question disappeared. But that the question was, if you don't have the knowledge, so you should have the knowledge, but if you don't have it, and then you nevertheless commission the company, and how should you proceed if you have not previously agreed on a framework agreement? So Jessica, what would be your response to that or tips?
It's pretty general. It doesn't matter if it fails because of accessibility or any other part. It could be anything that you forgot to state or in beforehand. But I think the sooner you realize that something is off, stop it and pause, because I think too many people continue because you are stressed about something. But that is the most expensive solution. I've guided a lot of people within procurement as well. And I guided them to don't buy too big projects or don't commit too much too early. Try out the collaboration as well. So one example we had where I didn't win the first project. I guided them to make sure that they had a possibility to evaluate and change supplier along the way. And their first initial collaboration was only based on money. That's always a bad thing. If money always is the highest priority when you choose a supplier, you will be surprised how hard the dialogue is and how many iterations and how much you can be involved in making new decisions. So thanks to my earlier advice for this person, they had an opening stated already in the tender and procurement that if we're not happy with this solution, we can start a new procurement for phase 2. So, and also we've had hard projects as well. And I think my responsibility as the commercial part of delivery is also to say, let's pause this one step back and maybe renegotiate or even terminate the collaboration if you have to.
Tough responsibilities there from the supplier side, but thank you very much. We are now at the end of this session, so thank you very much for all your insights that you were sharing with us, and also the responses, and thanks for the comments and questions. We had one comment in the chat also that the legal requirements should be on the supplier side as well as the public procurers, and I mean the EAA is kind of moving in that direction. So I think we're all striving for better accessibility requirements on all sides. But if we all work together, then hopefully we will move in the right direction. So thank you very much, procure specialists here today from different perspectives. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. And we will move to the coffee break. We have 15 minutes coffee break, and we'll meet again 2:30 Central European Time.